Hey everyone, I am Aaron Jagger, and at Looking Point, we help IT organizations make decisions around collaboration, security, networking, and cloud. Today, we're going to be talking a little bit about Microsoft Virtual Desktop infrastructure, more specifically, the Azure Virtual Desktop offering, and comparing it against the Windows 365 offerings. Let's go ahead and dig in. All right, welcome back. So, Microsoft Virtual Desktop infrastructure, it has had multiple iterations of this product, right? We started off initially with Windows Virtual Desktop. That was something that was deployed probably 3 or 4 years ago through the Azure Resource Manager, the classic iteration of it. That is pretty much gone. Now we are seeing really two flavors. There's Azure Virtual Desktop, or AVD as it's more colloquially known, as well as Windows 365, which is Microsoft's newest offering. It is more of a subscription based versus an infrastructure based. We're going to dive into the feature differential between those two, but let's start at a higher level, right? AVD, it's your classic infrastructure as a service model, right? You're going to be spinning up virtual machines. You're going to be dealing with storage accounts. You're going to be dealing with legacy SMB shares, maybe some domain connectivity or hybrid Azure AD joined versus Windows 365, right? That is way more of a subscription based. It's assigned per user, and depending on the flavor of even Windows 365, it can be almost set and forget versus a bit more configuration through the Enterprise Edition. So I do want to preface our conversation around Windows 365. There are two different flavors, Business and Enterprise. Today, we're really going to be focusing on the Enterprise flavor of this, as the Business version is significantly more restrictive and it would not be applicable to most organizations. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the feature differential. We'll dive in here. So on the infrastructure side, AVD truly is infrastructure as a service. You're spinning up virtual machines, you're dealing with storage accounts, you're linking it to things like FSLogix in your on-prem domain. Windows 365 is platform. Microsoft is handling the infrastructure on the back end. There are certainly some customizations you're able to push out, but it is significantly more restrictive than AVD. So let's talk a little bit about the differences in our infrastructure and provisioning process. Our infrastructure side, again, AVD, infrastructure as a service, versus platform with 365. Provisioning is another big difference between those two. Your virtual machine provisioning on AVD is handled through scaling sets, and that's the same if we're talking about a personal environment versus a pooled environment. With something like Windows 365, provisioning is on demand and it's handled by license assignment and group membership within Azure Active Directory. One area where both offerings are very similar is when we talk about network connectivity. Both support connection back to your existing Azure Virtual Network environment, which can of course be linked back down to your on-prem or colo locations through things like Azure gateways or other VPN connections. When we start talking about domain join options, this is where we start to see some larger differences. AVD, you're able to support a classic on-prem domain joined environment without any interaction with your Azure Active Directory or your Microsoft 365 environment. As more companies are transitioning to a hybrid or cloud supported solution, AVD does support hybrid Active Directory domain join or hybrid Azure AD join, as well as just recently they've gone full GA with Azure AD only joined AVD pools. Windows 365, on the other hand, does not support connectivity back to your local on-prem domain controller without routing through Azure Active Directory. So hybrid Azure AD join or Azure AD only are your two options there. I will say your Windows 365 environment is built from the ground up with native support for Azure AD joined devices with Intune and Autopilot co-management. Now, when it comes to something like profile management, that's your users directory, your desktop documents, photos, etc., anything related to that specific user, there's going to be two different offerings here, again, depending on which solution you choose to go with. AVD supports a pooled environment. Now we're talking your classic RDS style solution, multiple users logging into the same host machine. Profile management becomes a consideration when we start talking about data usage and profiles bloating our C drives or our network locations where we're storing them. FS Logics is the solution of choice that Microsoft has built an offering around in a native AVD deployment. So FS Logics, you can deploy that a few different ways. One of them is going to be your classic SMB share, a network drive, S drive, H drive that's mapped through things like group policy objects or Intune policy profiles. For personally assigned desktop pools, you can configure it so that users log into a different host machine each time. They may have exclusive rights to that machine for that session, but the next time they log in, there's no guarantee they're going back to the same host. Profile management is still a consideration. FS Logics can be assigned to a personal pool as well, but really when we start talking about personal pools, you should be looking at Windows 365. It is user assigned, it is managed by a subscription. There are still the same level of customizations, but when I log into this machine, it's my machine. I'm the only one there. Profile management becomes less of a concern and less additional infrastructure we need to deal with. We can leverage things like OneDrive known folder redirection, or just keep it on the C drive like a local profile. There's a lot of things to consider when you're talking about architecting out a VDI solution for your company. Now, personal versus pooled is the one that everybody thinks of, and a lot of times it's equated back to cost. Absolutely, pooled environments are traditionally going to be more cost effective, but it is a significantly deeper conversation than just cost. When we're talking about personal versus pooled, you also want to take into things like your application deployments. What types of workloads do your staff need to access and interact with on a daily basis? And what type of user experience are you going to get in a personal environment versus a pooled environment? Is your application resource dependent? Is your application going to require things like GPU acceleration? While we can absolutely create personal and pooled environments, a lot of times those application sets will not support a pooled environment. Make sure you're keeping that in mind. Another thing that should be top of mind is going to be around elasticity, your scaling. Are you going to be assigning these to individuals with set scaling plans based off of time of day or utilization? Or are you looking for a more passive approach where you set and forget a fully provisioned environment? Windows 365 is a bit more straightforward in that regard. You're assigning these per user. They're available 24 hours a day with no additional infrastructure costs like you would see in an AVD environment where you're leveraging and utilizing consumption even if no one's on it. One of the final considerations you're going to want to keep in mind is your device management architecture. Are you leveraging an on-prem environment in addition to your Intune and Autopilot deployments? This is an area that probably will require the most thought investment, long-term strategy planning. Is this device going to be managed by Intune policies and a cloud management strategy, or are we going to keep it tied in with our on-prem, maybe System Center Configuration Manager, Active Directory, group policy, some of those classic controls? If you heard anything during this and you thought, hey, I want to know more about that, leave a comment. Make sure you like and subscribe so that you get all of our content as we release it. We'll see you on the next one.